If you get admitted to the hospital, people are coming up, they're bringing you flowers, unless you're in intensive care, and I can't take flowers up there. Flowers, cards, balloons. They might sneak you in some chicken. I know my friends in the hospital always like, can you bring me a burger up here? Am I supposed to do that?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Dunham, and welcome to another episode of Let's Add Value with Ron and Marcus, where real talk meets real strategies meets real values. Take it away, Marcus.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Marcus. I'm one of the co-hosts of Let's Add Value podcast. And today I have the wonderful privilege of introducing somebody that I've known over the past 10 years. She has a beautiful personality and she never meets a stranger. Just a little bit about her. She's an experienced public speaker, you guys. And she has a passion for promoting understanding and acceptance of mental health issues with a specific focus on the churches and other social agencies and the best support their population. So without further ado, we're going to just turn it over to Miss Molly. Welcome to the podcast.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Yes. Miss Molly, it's always a pleasure to be in your presence.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure. And thank you for accepting the invitation and being here and being a part of us. Something you have to talk about today is going to be very special. But before we get into those things, just let everybody know a little bit more about you.
All right, sure thing. Well, I'm Molly Abrokwa. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I was born in Tennessee, raised in Mississippi, went to school in Arkansas, and then moved to Georgia. So if you want to know where I'm from, it's the South. I had a very religious upbringing. Both of my higher education degrees are from a Christian university, a very well accredited Christian university called Harding University in Arkansas. And those degrees were in psychology and marriage and family therapy. 90% of the therapy I've done in my career has been with children and adolescents and their families, though I did a couple years on a geriatric psych unit, which was a fun experience. That's another podcast. But then about 10 years ago, came along with Marcus into the Medicaid world where we met and have been doing case management. And then for the past 3 years have been a full-time clinical trainer for the community and for foster and adoptive parents. And now I'm launching into a new space of training churches and social agencies to understand and manage mental health issues in their populations. In those agencies and settings where mental health may be overlooked or taken for granted, raising awareness and building empathy through knowledge and humor.
Interesting.
That's a whole lot. You just unpacked a whole lot. That you went from A to Z in regards to what I would say the mental health space, right?
Yes.
And so I mean it's incredible. So I'm gonna
Right.
give you your kudos off the top for that because a lot of people can't have that wide range and still be impactful and intentional and purposeful about their their agenda or their assignment, right?
Yeah.
And so now that you said you kind of branched off and you're doing something in another arena, tell us what actually made you go in that direction. Because I see you got this elevated minds, open hearts. Talk a little bit more about that. Prompt you to go in this direction.
Well, I've always been somebody who led with my heart, feelings on my sleeve, very, very open hearted. But I'm also someone who loves knowledge. And I feel like you can't really influence someone's emotions, but if you can present them with some knowledge, something they can react to. So even in therapy, rather than sit and talk with children and adolescents, I would show a movie, read a poem, watch an episode of a TV show, let something tap into the emotions and let someone take in information and then do with it what they will in their heart, mind, and soul. And so, like I said, I grew up in a religious setting where mental illness was seen as weakness or frailty or lack of faith. And as I have grown and also struggled with anxiety myself, have realized that that is a medical process, that it is separate from your faith, it is separate from your spirituality. And so as I've worked in psychiatric settings and tried to tell people, you don't feel weird when your friend goes to the ER for their blood pressure or for an asthma attack. But if someone goes to the ER with thoughts of suicide, no one knows what to say. No one knows what to do when it's really the same biological processes. And so trying to remove that stigma through knowledge. And also I relate a lot of my personal experience in the workplace and in my own mind to kind of connect with the audience.
Okay.
All right.
So
That's good.
you talked about anxiety. That was something that, I know a lot of people who deal with it, right?
Mhm.
And so in your experience, talk a little bit more about how does that affect one in their everyday activities?
So I've had people say to me, you don't seem like an anxious person. Well, that's taken a lot of work. That is support system, that is medication, that is self care, that is building confidence. Sometimes it's faking it till you make it. And so realizing that there's no real blood test for mental illness, there's no telltale signs unless you see someone in a crisis. And so a lot of therapists were trained, don't talk about your personal issues. So in the drug treatment world, you're expected, oh, I'm in recovery. I'm also an addict, and you're expected to share that struggle with your patients. And some places won't hire a drug treatment person unless they have lived experience. But with mental health, it's don't talk about it, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. But I've seen the light come on in patients' eyes when they realize I get it. And I've seen the light come on in a friend's eyes when I say, "Oh yeah, panic attacks are terrible." And they think you that can't be you. But as you guys know very well, anxiety and depression plagues a lot of people in the mental health profession, and we have to be just as intentional in self-care as we're trying to get them to be. So anxiety is kind of one of those silent killers. It can do anything. It doesn't have to be a panic attack. It can be lack of sleep. It can be no appetite. It can be irritability and anger. It can take any kind of form. So the real beauty is listening to each other. If Ron has anxiety, it's not the same as yours. It's not the same as mine. And so elevated minds, that's that learning piece. That's that listening piece. And then the open hearts is being with you and giving you what you need, and not assuming anything about the people we're talking to.
Good. What are some of those practices you found to be helpful in supporting, mental health?
Again, it goes along with your physical health. So I don't know who coined this, but I don't know if you've ever heard of HALT, HALT. No one's at their best if they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And so making sure you're not hungry, angry, lonely, or tired is a good key. Basic self care, I think studies have shown being out in nature. When I wake up in the morning, if I don't feel like I've had enough sleep, if I can get outside and hear the birds, put my bare feet on the ground, we may talk more about grounding later, feel the breeze, time out in nature. We have our heads in screens all the time. So I try, even if I'm watching videos on my phone, maybe do it on the porch. Introverts, extroverts, I'm an extrovert. So being around certain people will give me energy, but it's really figuring out what works for each person. There's no set dynamic. And there's also, I feel compelled to say, if self-care isn't doing it, you may need professional help. Therapists need therapy and medication too, just like doctors need to go get their fit. Nobody tells a doctor don't ever get a physical because you're a doctor.
That's right.
But if a therapist goes into therapy, it's like, ooh, it's the same thing. Dentists get their teeth cleaned. Massage therapists get massages. We have to maintain ourselves. Oh, sometimes we need professional help. And it's important. That's always a part of my presentations. How do I know when I need to go into a clinic or take medication instead of just, trying to pray through it or talk through it, or in my case, nap through it?
Is it true that you said being connected to the earth, and it's true that people who like walk barefoot in the grass and things like that, is that helping? Does that help for some people?
Yeah, I don't know all the science. I want to look more into that because, I don't know, it's kind of rough out there. I don't have those kind of feet that can walk on pebbles. I know for me, just feeling the breeze, even though I live in a fairly busy neighborhood, I got birds I feed, squirrels I feed, a stray cat, now two stray cats that I feed. So interacting with nature and interacting with animals kind of gets me out of my head. If I'm taking care of, I don't have children. So what do? I take care of the animals. And so caring for someone else keeps me from just focusing on my own thoughts and gets me out of my
That's
head.
good. You just made me think, well, boots on the ground. That's all.
Hey, bare feet on the ground.
I need the boots. I got sensitive feet. I can't be out there just running.
Definitely, I understand that. Hey, so Molly, so I guess I have a question. So I grew up, I'm an OG. So, I'm not gonna tell my age, but I'm an OG. So I grew up where, I'm a believer, and I was in the church and everything else, grew up in the church and everything else. And I never heard anybody talk about mental health issues, right? Complete. Now, I know people are talking about it now, and leaders are talking about it. The church that I go to, they talk about it. and they talk about mental health and different things of that nature, but I don't see the church as a whole, really talking about mental health and really, indulging in that part of, like self-care, emotional health, physical health, spiritual health. All of those things are tied together. So what has been your experience so far in regards to as you dive into the religious sector?
Yeah, I don't see it either, Marcus. Hence my new business. Just to get a master's degree in marriage and family therapy from an institution that was very aligned with biblical principles, but also very professional. We learned all the same, from Freud to Jung, all the way up to Erickson and experiential therapy and CBT and DBT. The knowledge was presented to us in conjunction. And the way my education was done, and I'm going to give a shout out here and hope that some of my professors see this. The spiritual part of my program, they say, y'all have all been raised in the church. You got an undergrad. I was a double major in Bible. So y'all got the knowledge. But what they did with us is they tore us apart and put us back together and basically said they pointed out the weaknesses, the stumbling blocks, the blind spots, and really focused on us getting okay with ourselves before we went to help anybody else. And I think that's what's really important for leaders of any organization to do. I agree with you, Marcus. I think we are starting to see it more. I've spoken at several churches, and the transparency, regardless of race, regardless of age, the presentation has been embraced. And
Good,
a lot of
good,
those
good.
churches have experienced suicides. They have experienced high divorce rates. And I'm so proud to see churches starting to ask why. I'm
Uh-huh.
proud that I haven't heard in a long time, this guy took the easy way out, or this woman's faith is weak. I have not been hearing that. And yet, at my most recent presentation, I had an anonymous way for people to answer questions. And some people in the group were shocked that 50% of that group had considered suicide at some point in their life. We aren't
Wow.
shocked, but they were
Talking
shocked.
about average everyday people, right?
100%. And it has nothing to do with your faith being weak. It has to do with the fact that depression turns off the part of your brain that creates happiness. And that most people who complete suicide feel like they're doing the world a favor. They feel like the world would be better without me. And so I'm really glad, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but I'm hearing that less, but the feelings are still there. And that's why, having grown up with so much religion and spirituality, I have a passion for teaching that in those environments, for letting people know it is okay to be depressed and be spiritual. It's okay to go to a therapist or take medication and be bipolar. These are medical conditions. And so, just like you said, Marcus, not seeing that much is why I want to do
Uh-huh.
it. But I went to one church where a lady raised her hand. She said, Miss Molly, I praise Jesus for the Bible and for my psychiatrist. And everybody in there started laughing because, they've seen this woman for 70 years be a little off. And she's like, praise Jesus and my psychiatrist. And so that was a great moment.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You think the church is equipped to handle a lot of the mental health issues, and what are some of those misconceptions out there in the religious community that go on about mental health?
You know what? I'm not gonna come down on churches. I think the church is just as equipped as schools. I think the church is just as equipped as factories. A lot of churches are the most loving, will do anything for you, but they may not know what to do.
Mhm.
Now, my parents' church is blessed because their preacher is also a licensed counselor. I would love to see more of that. You see a lot of people get a master's in divinity along with their therapy masters. I think that's wonderful. I think churches are as well equipped as anybody else. I think this movement to get more knowledge about mental health, whether it's the military, whether it's churches, schools, I found out today that Georgia is now requiring every school to have some sort of emergency management, like predictive model for school shooters. I think every arena is building that awareness. And like I said, given my background, I was just drawn to the religious arena. But it's happening in schools, it's happening in companies. Delta Airlines just had a whole suicide prevention education. So I think it's happening everywhere.
Good.
I definitely agree with you. I think, it's just something, from a societal factor that we actually have to just, take heed to and understand that it's a part of our real life world at this moment, right?
And
And
COVID
so
made it
because
worse. COVID, the isolation of COVID made it worse. And so I think we're also, it's not like the whole world just decided, let's be more knowledgeable and more kind. They couldn't argue with the fact that these children who were in school at home, mental health just went, and extroverts who have been working at home for all these years, the isolation that came with COVID, people almost had no choice but to face this thing.
that was crazy you talked about COVID because I hear people say, I didn't know I didn't like my spouse until COVID happened.
Everybody's own.
Look, it functions different when you're both at work than when you're at home.
That's right. We see a rise in telehealth services during the COVID era, especially with, everything that was going on during the COVID era.
Yeah, all those people that were told you can't work from home, you have to be in an office, they're working from home now. So necessity is the mother of invention, right?
That's true.
And so I think one good thing that came from COVID is we're doing all this virtually. I mean, none of us are in the same city right now. And then here we are in this virtual living room having this discussion.
I like that, the virtual living room.
Trademark.
You said trademark it. So one of the things, like, as you go into, in the church settings, how do you prepare, to address the audience as you go in?
There's always, there's the basic information that I want to share that I feel is widely important. There are certain things I will always address, such as the role of spirituality, no matter what form your religion takes. I will always address that, such as suicide prevention. I will always address that. But there will definitely be a conversation. Are there any particular topics? My most recent church, they did a poll in the church, and what did they want? Anxiety, depression, stress, and anger. So what did I present? Anxiety, depression, stress, and anger. Because you don't want to go in. I don't have the arrogance to say that I understand every church and every set. You tell me what you need. And, I think that's one of the most important things about public speaking is that ability to pivot and that ability to read the audience and step up. And, these people aren't engaged and these people are engaged and their faces lit up when I said anxiety, so just trying to read the audience, but also doing that assessment beforehand. Why are you bringing me in? What is the ask? And then always, of course, those things that I have to be able to sleep at night knowing I covered, like suicide prevention. I'm never going to speak to a group and not talk about suicide prevention. So, yeah, a balance of what I feel is important, but definitely a focus on why are y'all having me here? You had
Okay,
me here
good,
because you
good.
have a need. And so, what is that need and how can I best meet that need?
Talk about some of those barriers it takes to get into because, a lot of churches, in certain communities don't like to talk about mental health. Talk about some of the barriers you faced or, anticipating, because I know some things you learn to overcome objections. But if you let us know some of those barriers you're coming across.
I'm going to be honest, Ron, I hadn't seen a lot of barriers. Really, the biggest barrier is we don't know we need it. But once we're in that room, you can start off high level. You can start off, these are the signs of anxiety. These are the ABCs of depression. And they're going to take it as deep as they want to take it. And
Gotcha.
you get that one person who says, well, I'm bipolar. And everybody says, and then, it's coming from them. They're going to take it as deep as they want to take it. So can I do a high level academic ABCs of depression type training? 100%. Is that better than nothing? And I'm also not going to let it get into trauma dumping. It's very clear I'm not here doing group therapy. I can do group therapy. I love group therapy. That is not what I'm doing with this business. This is psychoeducation. And so giving people a chance to speak, but then redirecting it into something that's beneficial for everyone. Honestly, really haven't seen those barriers. I like to work a crowd.
That's really good. What's funny, what came to mind to me was, it's like, growing up in the church and you'd be like, I knew something was wrong with that person. And you just be like, now it's clicking. As you get older, you be like, see, you just
Yeah,
you
I
just didn't
know.
embrace it. And just with that, going into that line of thinking, let's talk about faith, because how just, and just your own experience, and it may be something that, you may know or you may not know. How do you feel that faith can help or hinder someone in their mental health space?
It's generational. It is in certain demographic groups, there's an even stronger tendency to blame a demon or they don't have enough Jesus or they need to pray on that. To me, it's two-pronged. So faith in whatever you have faith in gives you the comfort, and it's a choice we make, okay? It's not intellectual always. It gives you the comfort of knowing someone's in charge. There's a big picture and I fit into that. But I'll be honest, the biggest way that faith supported me throughout my life is it brought me to the people who have supported me throughout my life. So sometimes it's not even about the religious belief, it's that commonality that built my village, that built my tribe. And the people I have in my life who have been in my life my entire 5 decades are the people I met at church. And so it's not completely the religious instruction that can make church helpful. It is also the community that makes it helpful. And so the faith, whatever you believe about God and Jesus and the world and the universe and how that makes sense, that's one aspect. The other aspect is that common faith brings you to the people that you need in your life. And people function a certain way when they're seeing the world the same way. And so that's
Marley,
two prongs.
you had your own sermon this now.
Right.
You just had your own sermon, and I hate to interrupt you, my bad, but that was a whole sermon this now, especially from the idea or the aspect of your village and your community. Always talk about support systems, right? And you just nailed it,
Mhm.
in my opinion, right? Because a lot of people don't want to put their trust in their, and just say, hey, I need a support system because we operate from an island of our own. And sometimes we need that, right? And sometimes you just need to be vulnerable, you need to be transparent, and you need to be honest. I always tell people, I say, hey, I'm gonna be honest about me so I could be honest about to you so you can honestly know how to treat me, right? And because there's certain things that I need, and if I don't honestly give you that information, then you really don't know how to operate in that space in regards to me.
Right.
Right. So that support system that you just talked about is meaningful and vital because we have a lot of people who in crowds, but they still isolated because they haven't opened up and really give everybody the information that they need to be real supportive. And so thank you for just opening that whole thing. That's why I said you had a whole sermon by itself.
A
Not
lot
to
of
take
thought
this
into
simple.
that. A lot of thought into the role of faith and it's not about the Christian faith. It's about, that's what I know best. That's what I come from. But anything, even if it's a knitting club or the people who get together and drink wine and do paintings of flowers, any kind of community where there's something bonding you together, it's never about the painting. It's never about the crochet. It's never about the animal rescue or the running group or whatever you're involved. It's about togetherness. And so a support system, a lot of people aren't fortunate to get that from their family. They may not even get it from their church. But the support system is a necessity. It's an absolute necessity. Some people's support system may be animals. That's fine. But you're right. Being an island, another thing they taught us in grad school is the more you focus on yourself, the worse you feel about yourself. And that's why when you go and you do a volunteer activity, you feel you're helping someone else, but at the end of the day, you feel better. Because the less we focus on our own thoughts, the worst thing I can do is sit at home alone and just mull it over, just chew that cud like a cow.
Uh-huh.
No good is going to come of that. But if I sit and chew the cud with you, then
Uh-huh.
that's a refreshment to me.
Well, if you're gonna chew with me, let's have some banana pudding. We're gonna sit down and have us some banana pudding.
Look, Ron may edit this out, but when I was in Tennessee last weekend, I had a banana pudding from a restaurant that had Nutter Butters instead of Nilla wafers. Now, think
Y'all
about
married
that
that
for a
out because
minute.
I don't eat that. That's right.
Hey, we gonna give Ross a sweet tea.
Yeah. I'm gonna drink that. Man, that's
Don't
good.
make that the clip that goes viral, Ron.
Right, right, right. Absolutely. Oh man, this is good, Molly. So I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about, we shouldn't forsake the assembly. I'm like, we say in church, the getting together of people. It's good to come together, like-minded folks, and I think you hit the nail on the head because your church was a big part of the community back in the day, and now we're seeing less and less people
Right.
now going or either online. And I think there's some things that you can get by being, we all say being in the number just one more time. So I'm glad you're in that space, and I'm glad we're having a conversation centered around mental health and spirituality because I think, again, you never know what people are dealing with. And I think some people, may blow it off as okay, it's something temporary, but it could be something long term
Mhm.
that people have been struggling with for a while and have been silent about it.
One thing I remember, and people still joke about it, and I mean, I'm sure I've said it many times, is, let's say I get an unexpected bonus at work, or I get a good deal on a car, or I win a scratch off and win $5. Ever heard the phrase, whoo, I must be living right? And we say that lightly, but I was thinking about that the other day and thought that's really kind of how people our generation were raised is if your life is going well, you're living right. And if you're having
That's right.
problems in your life, you're not living right. And you look at how level of income and wealth is equated with moral standards in our country. Poverty equals poor choices, low standards. They're not living right. Why don't they just work harder? And wealth is seen as the richer you are, the better you are, basically. The virtue of the rich and the way we look down at people in poverty when really life can just be life. And so somebody said that the other day, you must be living right. And I thought, what a terrible message. Because if I'm doing well because I'm living right and you're struggling, that only means one thing. You living wrong. And there are passages in scripture that talk about, God will bless you if you're doing this and doing that. And it's very easy to take that and say, she's not being blessed. She's not walking in her faith. Or Marcus has been blessed. He must be a man of faith. And so that's where involvement in a church that's not aware, you can end up blaming yourself for a mental illness that's really due to the chemicals in your brain. Because we know after all these years in this field, your life experiences can make your mental health better or worse, but life can be going fine and you can have a mental illness. On the flip side, there are people whose lives are constant chaos and tragedy. They're still doing all right. And so,
Hmm.
helping people, part of the elevated minds is separating out what is disease process, what is illness process, and what is circumstance.
Got it.
Because you
Got it.
can do
You know
everything
what?
to make your life better, better job, better spouse, nicer, well-behaved children, whatever, and still be struggling with bipolar or depression or PTSD. And so learning to tease out the difference, what is my life causing and what is my brain causing and how are they feeding off each other is where that elevated minds come from. I don't think we can build empathy until we understand that anxiety is not me being punished for some kind of sin or crime.
Makes sense. What is a scripture, a proverb, or a quote that you live by?
That's interesting. I have one right here by my desk that says, "Don't let anyone dull your sparkle." There's one that Taylor Swift actually says a lot. I don't know the exact quote, but the core of it is don't yuck somebody's yum. That the worst thing you can do is make fun of somebody for being excited about something. If somebody's excited about something, let them be happy with it. And then one of my favorites lately has been, are you ready for this one, Marcus? Buckle up for this one.
Uh-huh. I'm listening.
If you wouldn't accept their advice, don't accept their criticism.
That's a good one.
So take criticism, take constructive criticism, but from the people you trust. If your advice is trash and your own life is a mess, why am I taking to heart your criticism of me? I'll take criticism from those who have earned my trust and from those whose advice. If you wouldn't take their advice, don't take their criticism.
Man, that's really good. Because I always tell people this right here. People have to earn the right to speak into your life. I always feel like that. Just piggyback off of what you said, but I like yours better, right? I'm gonna put that one in, and I like the other one when you said something about don't let somebody yuck your yummy. Man, that's
See,
a real smooth.
I was always on the impression that when you buy people's opinion, you buy their lifestyle.
Yes,
That's another good one.
yes,
That's
yes.
another good one.
I just,
See, yeah, yeah,
I
y'all
am a,
dropping gems.
and Marcus, you've known me long enough. I am a people pleaser in recovery. It has taken me a long time to realize that my friendship and my time and my confiding and my trust is something to be earned. It is not something to be handed out. Now, I'm still very sensitive. I don't really love conflict, but I'm not scared of it anymore. I think I told Marcus this once. I'm laid back, but I can sit forward if I need to. So, you know, definitely,
Yeah.
people pleasing in that you were trying to create peace around you is fine, but people pleasing in that I say yes to everything and I bow who I am to what you need is long gone. And part of that circles back to my openness about anxiety, to my openness about figuring out spirituality and where I want to fall on that spectrum and what I believe. That all circles back to that transparency, to the fact that if I'm open with you, it creates safety for you to be open with me. And I do the same thing in a one-to-one conversation as I would in front of a group of 300 people. I'm going to let the Molly come out. And so far, that has been beneficial. So far, that has created a space in which people share things in a large group that their best friend next to them may not know.
So I have something. So you said something, and how does, and this is my question from it, how do you think being a people pleaser affected your ability, or how did it, my question is, how did it mess with your anxiety? How did it contribute any? Did it put you on Mars? Did it put you on Venus? Just talk about that some.
About put me in the hospital. When you take people pleasing and you pair it with perfectionism, and you add on a big dose of firstborn child, and you add on a big dose of only child for the first 8 years of your life, you feel that you can do no wrong. And here's a prime example. One of my early bosses in my career said to me, I think this job is too much for you. I think you should step down, because it was a management job and I was 25 years old. And 50-year-old Molly, I mean, blank,
Uh-huh.
blank year old Molly would say,
Uh-huh.
they're handing you a lifeline, girl. Take it. They're managing you out. Take it. 25-year-old Molly said, no, I can do this. I can do this. And started working 16 hours a day and stopped sleeping and did everything and rearranged her office furniture without asking maintenance for help and took on more clients and managed more programs and got on more committees. And that's when I first went on medication. That's when the panic attack started, the constant sick at the stomach started, the constant crying start. It was that I'm going to do this. I can do anything. And I have great parents. They always told me you can do anything. That is not a
Yeah.
bad thing to tell your kid. I'm sure y'all tell your kids the same thing. You can do anything. But I never tempered that with within reason. And so you
Yeah.
pair that people pleasing with that fear of failure, with that perfectionism, and it was a recipe for disaster.
Got it.
And now I'm not afraid to say, this is the best you're getting out of me on this Thursday. This is the best. Your 100% looks different every day. And I am completely okay with that.
And the reason why I asked that question, Molly, is because people of faith sometimes feel like they got to be everything to everybody.
Walk on water.
Exactly. And that's a form of people pleasing,
Yes.
right? And so I'm just under the impression at my age and being able to go through and experience life is that there should still be boundaries, you know? So that's why I really asked the question, because I'm quite sure the audience wanted to hear a little bit more about it, but I also wanted people to understand too, from a professional such as yourself, being a therapist that you are and your experience, even dealing with it, how it causes and it operates in a normal person's life, right?
And it's
So
such
you
a
had a
fine
better
line.
understanding.
It's such a fine line, right? Because you don't want to be an underachiever. You
Yeah.
don't want to say, well, I'm tired today, so I'm not doing it. How do you walk that line between giving it your best and making yourself sick? And I think, I'm going to put in a little plug here for the community resiliency model, which is my favorite thing I've ever taught, which I work into in some way every presentation. And it's about reading the signals from your nervous system. It's about reading what your body is telling you. If I wake up, my alarm clock goes off and I sit down at my computer to work and I'm already shaken, something's off. So how do you and it's a personal decision for everybody with accountability from friends and you're from that tribe, that village. How do you give it your best without giving it your all. Because don't give it your all. Because if I give it my all by 10 a.m., I got nothing to get me to 10 p.m. And if I give
Uh-huh.
my all to work, I got nothing for my spouse. If I give my all to my family, I got nothing for my job. So it's not about giving your all, it's about dividing it up appropriately. And it's such a tricky line, and that's why we have to learn about mental health. Personal feeling, this is not from my professional background, this is Molly's soapbox. We use our calendars as self-medication. If I can just stay busy enough, I won't have to think about my childhood trauma. I won't have to think about my marriage problems. I won't have to think about this and that. And we're judgmental about people who use drugs and alcohol to cope with life. But look at the people who busy. I do every activity. My kids are in every activity. And I'm too exhausted to think. And then suddenly they get a cold and they're on the couch for 3 days and they're depressed because they hadn't thought about their life in 20 years. So, it's a personal thing where we have to learn to read our body
Uh-huh.
to know, am
Uh-huh.
I giving it my best or am I using work to avoid my life?
Really, really deep, really deep. Well, definitely, Molly. You dropped some gems on us today. I'm gonna be honest with you. I've known you for a while, but I really I learned a lot from you today. Seeing you in this space is totally different from what I'm used to seeing, and so I love your passion. I love what you're bringing to the table, and I love the direction that you're going. Anything that we could do on this side, definitely. I know Ron agree with me. We'll definitely support you in that area. But I have the biggest question of all
Ooh,
questions.
let me get ready.
I want you. I need to know in your professional and personal experience.
Hmm. Is there a drum roll sound that I'm not picking up? Marcus has it in his head.
Okay, so let me bring it back.
Marcus has
Molly, the
overwhelmed
biggest
himself with
question.
the power of his question.
The biggest question. What's the ingredients in the communion juice?
The community cocktail?
What does it taste like?
Bless us all. So the community cocktail.
Hey, I had to throw it in. I know what
Love
it
it.
represents, right? I know what it represents. So all my people out there on the spiritual side, I'm a Bible believing Christian. I understand and know what it represents. Just a little joke, just for just for the sake of just having a little fun for a minute. But like I said, definitely appreciate you here.
Yeah.
Much things. So I'm gonna turn it over to Ron and let Ron have his way because I talk too much.
No, you're good. You're good.
Nobody's
So
ever said that, Marcus. This is the most I've ever heard you talk.
how can people reconcile their faith with the idea of seeking therapy or taking medication, Molly?
Look, you want the simple answer? Jesus made medicine and psychiatrists too. But my real answer, that's not kind of a smart aleck answer. Here's my real answer. Why don't I feel ashamed to go to the doctor for my blood pressure? Why don't I feel ashamed, even if the blood pressure is my fault because I put salt on everything? Why don't I feel ashamed to go to the doctor for diabetes? Even though I'm always getting 2 pies at the potluck. You know, why am I not ashamed? Even if now mental illness is even different because that can hit you with no choice whatsoever. But
Right.
even with physical illnesses that we may have contributed to, we don't judge people like we do. But when I tell you, if there wasn't an imbalance in my brain, the pill wouldn't work,
Mhm.
right? And nobody says, I'm taking lisinopril for my blood pressure, but please don't tell anybody. Or did y'all hear Martha's taking lisinopril for blood pressure? No, when we find out Ron is taking losartan for blood pressure, we say, way to go, Ron. Way to take
Mhm.
care of yourself. You know, I very often use this example. If you go to the ER for diabetes, they're going to check your sugar, give you fluids, send you home, right? If you go to the ER 3 or 4 times, they're going to admit you to the hospital. If you get admitted to the hospital, people are coming up, they're bringing you flowers, unless you're in intensive care, and I can't take flowers up there. Flowers, cards, balloons. They might sneak you in some chicken. I know my friends in the hospital always like, can you bring me a burger up here? Am I supposed to do that? They're loving you. But let somebody hear that Marcus was admitted to a psychiatric unit. Let somebody hear that Marcus is taking an antidepressant. What's he need an antidepressant for? What's he got to be sad about? We've all heard somebody, what's he got to be sad about? You know what? Just like my pancreas may not make enough insulin, my brain may not make enough serotonin. So I need a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, to adjust the chemicals. Nobody judges you when you're adjusting your pancreas or you're adjusting your liver enzymes or your kidneys, or you even need a transplant. You can't get a transplant of your brain. People are just walking through life coping without medication, without assistance, because they don't want the judgment. And so it's on us as the community to destigmatize. It's on us as the community to treat mental illness. Mental health is health. Mental health is healthcare. And to applaud people when they go into therapy, applaud people when they take their medication, just like we would, if you break your leg and you say, I don't need this cast, I'm just going to go to church. Brother, your leg is going to snap in half.
Uh-huh.
It needs to be both. And it's on us as the community, and I'm putting special responsibility on the religious community to stop shaming people for a
Uh-huh.
medical illness.
Nah.
Sermon over. Now pass
And
the plate.
nah, I got you. And I totally agree with you, Molly. Like I said, because me personally, just growing up in the church and in the faith, I'm glad to see that the church is
Mhm.
turning the curve and representing, because there's certain things. So you can have faith about things. You can pray about things, but I also believe that God, like you said, God put people in place to help people, right? And so your profession and your expertise is something that you go to utilize. Like, so if I want a house being built, I go to a carpenter. I go to a general
Was
contractor.
that a
But
Jesus
if I'm
joke?
having no, not this time. So therefore I just have to be focused on what I need. And so that's why, like I said, I love the direction of where you're going, because we definitely need that more insight inside. And sometimes it just need to come from somebody who has an expertise in it. And so you're somebody who's, I will say, a unicorn, because, you have the biblical background as well as the education, right? And then the experience, the wide range of experience. So, being that unicorn, and what you're doing, I feel like you're best served in that area. And some people, we just have to know where we are and who we are, and what's best for us. And I think, what you've been talking about and you've been sharing with us is an absolute beauty, because we need it in that sector.
Well, and something's been kind of gnawing at me. So, practicing what I preach, I'm listening to my nervous system, and I figured out what it is. I want to be clear in my message that I'm not criticizing churches. Churches who
Okay, sure.
people and congregations, I don't think 90% of that is intentional. I don't think it's unloving. I think it's lack of knowledge. That's why I didn't name my business Open Hearts. Elevated
Uh-huh.
minds, open hearts. And you can take that as two nouns, elevated minds and open hearts, or you can take that as an elevated minds will open hearts. And so I want to make
Uh-huh.
sure the message is clear that this is not a criticism of religious and social agencies. It is a
No.
breaking of a pattern. It is, if I say I'm struggling with depression and somebody says, I'm going to pray for you, that's not them trying, in most cases, to disregard. It's awareness.
Uh-huh.
It's just like, cigarette ads in the 50s used to be advertised as health products. Oh, there used to be cocaine in Coca Cola. When we know better,
Yeah.
Maya Angelou says, when you know better, we do better. And so it's
Absolutely.
not in any way a negative reflection. I'm not implying
Yeah.
that people are being unloving. It's an area in which there's less knowledge because there
Uh-huh.
is a reliance and an expectation that the faith will fix everything. And we need
Yeah.
to get to the point with mental health where we are with physical health, which is pray about it, then go to the doctor.
And I'm a believer with you as well, because if you have an issue, I come from a background, you go to church, right?
Hmm. That's right.
And so guess what? The professionals with the expertise are in church as well. And so that's where, I come from that background. You go there. right? Even, if I have some struggles and different things of that nature, even in my expertise, I still go to the church because guess what? That's what my faith drives me,
Mhm.
right? And that's what I believe in. And like Ron said earlier, faith not forsake the assembly. I can't remember the scripture right off. I ain't that versed in it, but I do understand that church is important. Being in that assembly is important. So definitely, I agree with you 100%. It's just the evolution of where we're going, right? And I really appreciate it because, like I said, I go to a church and they have a counseling ministry there, right?
A
And
lot
it's
of
just not.
churches do, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're looking at from Christian counseling to mental health counseling, and I just love the fact that they're there, right? So for me, I definitely appreciate it all the way around. So
Yeah, and you wanna make sure that the credentials are there. So there's pastoral counseling, there's Christian counseling. I've never referred people to Christian counselors unless I had looked at them or talked to them, because there is a place for talking to your pastor and prayer if that's what you believe in. But if I'm gonna refer you to a therapist, I need to see those credentials too. And to be clear what you're looking for from therapy, if you're looking for spiritual support or if you also may need medication. There's a place for all those different kinds of counseling, so you got to make sure you're getting to where you need. I'm getting to where you need. I was also raised that do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together meant that if the church decided to meet on Tuesday, you better be there Tuesday, Sunday night, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. And that's important to a lot of people, but I don't think that's what
Absolutely.
that verse means. I think that means don't try to do this on your own. Don't give up on your community. Not about,
uh-huh,
if you sleep in or you go to bed early Wednesday night and miss that devotional time. I don't think it's about that. I think it's do not forsake
uh-huh, uh-huh.
assembling together. And that's true with churches or social clubs or sports teams.
That's
You
right.
can't miss every practice and show up at the game. If you're committed to a community, I put that in there for y'all sports people. I know you didn't expect the sports analogy. I'm not sure what depths of my
Right.
subconscious that came out of,
Right.
but not forsaking means don't try to do this alone.
And I
Definitely.
saw that too as a traditional, we have a lot of folks, church folks particularly, who are major traditionalists. We've always done it this way. This is the way we're always going to do it. And I think I heard my pastor say it once before, like, sometimes people get armed with new information. The way you may be looking at it, okay. And then you have to look at the context of the times. We've evolved from early days to now. And now where you're seeing, we're communicating via, across the internet and things like that. So things are evolved. We can get more information out. We can disseminate more information as well. But also, yeah, I can pray for you, but I also can also recommend you to go see a therapist as well.
And
And
also,
I
mental
think that's
illness is not something that happens over there. It's something that happens in every group and in every family. And churches, social clubs, country clubs, whatever the tribe is, they can be very insulated. And so, like I said, when I was at a church recently and 50% of the people in the room says I've thought about harming myself, it was like, what? Right here in this room with all of us who know each other? Yep. And that came because we did it anonymously. And so
Uh-huh.
these places have to learn this is not something that happens over there with those people. This is something that happens right here within the people we love. And until one person speaks up, that can start an avalanche of wellness and caring for each other and being closer than we've ever been before because we feel like we can really be ourselves.
Yeah, well, definitely.
before we get out of here, Molly, tell us about your mission to educate, the religious and social organizations that are out there.
I heard a thing once that said, it's not a direct quote, but it was about, let me think of how it went. Even if you never, even if you never degrade your daughter, she hears how you speak about other women. So I've heard it in terms of LGBTQ issues. You're making jokes, you're making cracks, you're criticizing. You never know who's in the room with you, who is in that population. And what you're showing them is you're not safe. And if I'm struggling with depression, but I'm attending a class that you're teaching and you're making jokes about depression, you know what? You're a red flag. And if we walk through this world giving each other one of Marcus's favorite phrases, give them some grace. Instead of what is wrong with you, how can I help? And if we the more people are educated about mental health, the more they may think before they speak and before they do irreparable damage to someone they love who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, struggling with anxiety. I was at the grocery store the other day and a guy was in there whistling so loud. You got to know, I hate whistling. My ears just don't exist. It's like nails on a chalkboard. And I was so annoyed that I almost said something to him about it. And I got on the same aisle as he was. He had Tourette's. I was looking at him and the therapist part of my brain kicked in.
Uh-huh.
He has Tourette's. I saw his tics. I heard his tics. And I realized
Uh-huh.
as a mental health professional running a business based on building empathy, I almost walked up to that man and said, "Can you please stop?" And what would that have done to someone who probably took a lot of courage to come out to
Uh-huh.
Winn-Dixie that night? And that's
That part.
somebody who's teaching others to do it. But I want to be transparent about that because I am a therapist, but I'm also a human being. And I struggle with patience. Me telling him, "Could you please stop?" is first of all, and second of all, could have stopped that man from coming out of his house again for a year. And so the more we educate, the more we can walk through life thinking you don't ever know what somebody's struggling with. And that pressure gets higher sometimes in a religious body where you're afraid you may be seen as weak or not having faith. And that's where my mission comes from. I will teach anybody. Let me be clear. If you need me to come speak about mental health, I'll be there. I just
Right.
have a particular focus because of my background on religious organizations, but it could be anywhere. And I want to jump on this bandwagon of everybody wanting to learn more about mental health right now.
Yeah, that's real good. All right, last question we have for you. So, for our listeners struggling right now, what piece of advice would you give someone that would you like for them to hear from this podcast?
If there, what was the first part again?
So, for our listeners who's struggling right
Listeners
now,
who are struggling.
what's the one piece of advice you would give them, rather spiritual or practical, that you want them to hear on this podcast?
I would say to the extent you're able, get out of your own head. Learn about what's going on. Look at your symptoms. Talk, even if you just talk to your primary care doctor. I had a friend who thought she was having a heart attack. It was her thyroid. For older women, a urinary tract infection can cause psychosis. Go to your doctor, get a checkup, talk to them about what's going on. Talk to other people. Watch a movie about depression or anxiety. Big thing right now, autism. We got Love on the Spectrum. We got so many TV shows and movies about autism where people are just learning. There has always been autism. And so
Uh-huh.
looking at media, talking to people, just Google how common is depression? You might be really surprised. So what mental illness does is it isolates us and it makes us feel like not only are we the only one who feels this way, but it's our fault. And so trying to get, I hope that this podcast will reach someone who feels like nobody else has ever felt this way. And I hope they will hear that even mental health professionals have to take care of ourselves. It's always the plumber's toilet that clogs. I know you'll like that one, Ron. It's always the plumber's toilet that clogs. So, my best piece of advice, try to get out of your head as much as possible. The more you focus on it, the worse you'll feel. And so, take care of your body. Even if it's your mind that's hurting, take care of your body. Eat, rest, go outside. But the biggest thing is you're not alone. Promise you, in a group of 5 people, somebody else in there is struggling.
How can the people reach you, Molly? Let everybody know.
All right. So my business is Elevated Minds, Open Hearts. You can find me under that name on LinkedIn. If you run it all together and put at gmail.com, you have that. I'm still building my website. So feel free in the comments, Ron, to put all that information. If anybody wants, I'm using my personal cell phone number still for my business. I don't really want to throw that out there because I'm hoping this will reach a lot of people. But Elevated Minds Open Hearts at gmail.com is my dedicated business address. It's also my LinkedIn profile. I would love to have some opportunities to reach more people.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Molly, we want to thank you for being here. This has been amazing. This is a blessing to have you on this podcast. And we want everyone, if you know someone who may be struggling with mental health, please get them some help. Share this podcast with someone you may know. So you share it, like, subscribe, do everything, but make sure, one, if you see something, say something. Like we would say, if you see someone in danger, but if you see someone who may be having an issue, you see something, say something. So that's our time for today, folks. We thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.